Racist cop pulls over black billionaire. What happens next destroys his career. They say money changes everything, but for Jada Sinclair, a self-made black billionaire with a heart of gold, that statement couldn't be further from the truth. On a late summer night in Chicago, after a dazzling charity gala at the Four Seasons Hotel, she found herself at the mercy of a routine traffic stop. Except there was nothing routine about it. The officer behind the flashing lights had a sinister motive fueled by prejudice hidden behind his badge. Little did he know that Jada, an influential philanthropist with powerful connections, would be the one force capable of shattering his hateful stereotypes. And by the end of this encounter, his career and entire life would be destroyed in ways he never saw coming. Jada Sinclair gazed at the glittering Chicago skyline through the tinted window of her Rolls-Royce Cullinan. She had just wrapped up a fundraising gala at the Four Seasons Hotel, where millions of dollars were pledged to support her new women's entrepreneurship program. Outside, the city hummed with energy. Neon lights danced across the Chicago River, and late-night revelers dotted the sidewalks near the Magnificent Mile. The night was warm, filled with a sense of accomplishment and hope. Born on the South Side, Jada's journey from humble beginnings to the billionaire stratosphere was anything but typical. Her father was a dedicated community organizer, often working alongside civil rights activists. Her mother was an elementary school teacher who believed fiercely in the power of education. Growing up, Jada absorbed both her parents' passions, justice and learning. At 25, she launched an innovative tech startup that streamlined small business logistics, offering a lifeline to countless minority-owned enterprises. Within a decade, her venture soared, eventually going public and catapulting Jada into the ranks of the country's wealthiest individuals. But despite her wealth and acclaim, Jada never forgot the reason for her success: the unwavering support of her family and community. She took her fortune and poured it into mentorship programs, scholarship funds, and grants for aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly women of color. Tonight's gala had been a resounding success, aligning her foundation with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and private investors from around the globe. She was poised to launch an incubator in Chicago's historically underfunded neighborhoods. The future felt bright. As the Cullinan navigated the city streets, Jada's personal assistant, Carmen Morales, scrolled through a tablet displaying the night's press coverage. "You've already made the front page of tomorrow's Chicago Tribune," Carmen said excitedly. "They're calling you the most powerful woman in the Midwest." Jada offered a modest smile. "That's an exaggeration, but I'm glad the cause is getting attention. If even one more young girl sees these articles and believes she can become an entrepreneur, then it's all worth it." The car progressed down Lakeshore Drive, passing illuminated skyscrapers on one side and the dark expanse of Lake Michigan on the other. Jada took a moment to breathe in the sense of serenity. This was the city she loved, the place that held her earliest memories. She was determined to make it better for the next generation. Carmen glanced at her watch. "It's nearly midnight. Are you sure you don't want to go straight home? We have an early meeting tomorrow with Mayor Brandon Johnson to finalize the city partnership." Jada shook her head. "I promised my friend Dr. Alicia Porter I'd drop by her clinic in Bronzeville tonight. She wanted to show me the newly renovated pediatric ward we funded. I can't let her down." They exited Lakeshore Drive and made their way into quieter streets. The Cullinan purred smoothly beneath the streetlights, its custom midnight blue paint reflecting the urban glow. The roads were less congested now, offering Jada a moment of reflection on her achievements of the evening. Little did she know, fate had a far different plan in store. A few blocks later, the driver slowed, noticing something in the rearview mirror. The flash of red and blue lights suddenly cut through the night. A police cruiser pulled up behind them, siren wailing briefly before falling silent. The driver exchanged a quick, uneasy glance with Jada in the rear seat. Jada felt her heart sink slightly. She'd had her share of racial profiling experiences, even as a billionaire. One would think that wealth might shield her, but prejudice can rear its head in the most unexpected situations. For a fleeting moment she recalled the stories her father used to tell her about civil rights battles and the importance of standing tall in the face of intimidation. She released a measured breath and resolved that she would handle this stop with the same calm dignity she approached everything else in life. "Pull over," she said gently. "Let's see what this is about." As the driver guided the Rolls-Royce to the curb, the swirl of anxiety in Jada's chest grew stronger. She had no idea that this single traffic stop would spiral into a storm of revelations, lies, and the biggest scandal the Chicago Police Department had seen in years, and one man's career would never recover from the damage about to unfold. The siren's flash painted the sleek Rolls-Royce with pulses of red and blue. Jada exchanged a reassuring nod with Carmen. Her driver lowered the window partway as the officer approached. Even before he spoke, the tension was palpable. There was something about the cop's stance, legs braced apart, shoulders squared aggressively, one hand resting ominously near his holstered weapon. His nameplate read, "Officer C. Reynolds." He was in his mid-40s, with close-cropped brown hair and a stiff jaw that pulsed as he glanced at the luxury vehicle. Jada noticed the slight sneer curling his lips. She'd seen that look before countless times. Suspicion, disapproval, maybe even hatred. It was all too familiar. Reynolds clicked on his flashlight, shining the beam directly into the driver's face first, then sweeping it to Jada and Carmen in the back seat. "License and registration," he demanded curtly, ignoring standard courtesy. His voice was sharp, devoid of the typical professional politeness. Jada's driver, Leonard, calmly retrieved the requested documents. "Is there a reason we were pulled over, officer?" he asked in a measured tone. Reynolds snorted. "Improper lane change," he said, not bothering to conceal his skepticism. "And this window tint looks suspect." He paused, leaning forward to peer at Jada. "You all coming from some fancy party?" The question dripped with condescension, and Jada swallowed back a biting retort. She'd learned the hard way that confrontations with the police, especially ones who displayed hostility, could escalate quickly. Instead, she spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Yes, officer. We were at a charity event. Is there anything else you need from us?" Reynolds regarded her for a moment, narrowing his eyes. He was clearly sizing her up. The flashlight beam danced across the interior, lingering on the Cullinan's plush seats, the customized accents that whispered wealth and influence. But all Reynolds seemed to see was a black woman who, in his eyes, had no business in such an expensive car. Jada could feel his prejudice radiating off him like heat. "I'm going to need you all to step out of the vehicle," Reynolds announced. His tone made it sound less like a request, more like a punishment. A jolt of disbelief crossed Carmen's face, and Leonard froze in place. "Step out?" Jada echoed softly. "May I ask why, Officer Reynolds? We've provided our documents, and this is a routine traffic stop, correct?" He bristled at the polite pushback. "Yes, ma'am, but I have the right to ensure no illegal items are in the car. Standard procedure." Carmen, seated next to Jada, opened her mouth to protest, but Jada placed a gentle hand on her friend's arm, signaling for her to remain calm. "We'll cooperate," Jada said. "We have nothing to hide." Her voice wavered slightly, but she forced a reassuring smile. She'd been in many tense situations in the business world, negotiating with high-stakes investors and navigating corporate takeovers. Yet there was something about being singled out on a dark street by a potentially hostile officer that churned her stomach. Wealth and success offered no guarantee of safety from bias. Reynolds ordered Leonard, Jada, and Carmen to step onto the sidewalk. Another patrol car arrived, lights flashing, as if Officer Reynolds had called for backup. A second officer, younger and visibly uncertain, approached. He seemed puzzled by the sight of three well-dressed individuals standing next to a top-of-the-line Rolls-Royce on an otherwise quiet street. His name tag read, "Officer Martinez," and he flashed a look at Reynolds that seemed to question why he'd requested assistance. "Is everything all right here?" Martinez asked, glancing at the Cullinan and then at the three individuals. Jada noticed a flicker of recognition in Martinez's eyes, as if he might have recognized her from local news coverage. She had been featured often in Chicago-based philanthropic stories. Reynolds ignored Martinez's inquiry. Instead, he pressed Jada further. "Ma'am, mind if I search your purse?" Jada's stomach twisted. She knew her rights. As a public figure, she also knew that refusing a search could escalate a situation, but consenting might invite further violations. Carmen shot her a worried glance, and Leonard tensed, fists clenching. "Officer Reynolds," Jada began carefully, "I have the right to refuse, but to show my cooperation you're free to look. I only have my phone, some makeup, and personal items." Reynolds grunted. He took Jada's purse and rummaged through it, without the slightest hint of decorum. Carmen shifted uneasily, and Jada could sense her friend's anger simmering beneath the surface. She could practically feel it radiating off Leonard too. Yet they remained silent, standing in the warm Chicago night as passing cars slowed to gawk at the unfolding spectacle. After a few moments, Reynolds handed the purse back, apparently disappointed that he hadn't found anything incriminating. He then circled the Rolls-Royce, opening doors and popping the trunk. Martinez stood by, a conflicted look on his face. The search was turning up nothing but the standard car emergency kit, a neatly packed suitcase of outfits Jada intended to donate to a local charity thrift store, and sealed boxes of educational tablets for the Bronzeville Clinic. Finally, Reynolds walked back to where Jada stood, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can go," he said, voice thick with contempt. "Next time, watch the lane changes." For a moment, Jada felt a wave of relief. But something in Reynolds's eyes told her this would not be the end of it. The look was hateful, as though her compliance meant she had won this small skirmish, and he despised her for it. She could practically see the gears turning in his mind, crafting some twisted narrative where she was the villain to his hero. As she and her companions re-entered the car, Jada noticed that Reynolds stood by the curb, glaring. She had no idea that he was already plotting a much more devastating move, a scheme that would unleash a series of events leading to a storm of media coverage, public outrage, and an investigation that would shake the foundation of the Chicago Police Department. Exhaling slowly, Jada nodded to Leonard, who pulled the Cullinan back onto the street. Though she tried to brush off the encounter, her heart was pounding, and a subtle dread had begun to coil in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't just any traffic stop. It was the beginning of a battle she never asked for, and one that would soon grow to unimaginable proportions. The next morning, an unsettling tension lingered in the air. Despite her best efforts to focus, Jada found her mind drifting back to the previous night's traffic stop. The condescending tone of Officer Reynolds, his invasive search, that simmering hatred in his eyes, none of it would leave her alone. And it wasn't just about her. It was a reminder that no matter how successful or how far she'd come, some people would only see her as a target because of the color of her skin. Seated in her corner office overlooking Chicago's busy downtown, Jada tried to shift gears. A conference call with city officials was about to start, discussing the upcoming incubator project in Bronzeville. Carmen tapped away on her laptop at a nearby desk, ready to jot down every bullet point and to-do list item. Yet Jada couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled over her. When the call connected, Mayor Brandon Johnson's voice filled the speaker. "Good morning, Ms. Sinclair. Thank you for your time. We're excited to move forward with the partnership. How was the gala last night?" Jada cleared her throat, pushing her worries aside. "It was fantastic, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your support. We raised more funds than expected, so we're looking at expanding the scope of the incubator to include digital literacy courses for local youths." "That's wonderful to hear," the mayor replied. "And how are you personally? Any concerns before we dive into the details?" Jada hesitated a moment. She almost brought up the incident with Officer Reynolds, but decided it might be premature. She wasn't even sure how to articulate the encounter. Drawing negative attention to the police department could jeopardize her partnership with the city if handled incorrectly. "I'm doing well," she lied gently. "Let's get down to business." The discussion shifted to zoning, construction timelines, and strategies for community outreach. The more they planned, the more excited Jada became. The incubator wasn't just an office building, it represented hope for so many who felt stifled by a lack of resources. By the time they ended the call, Jada felt lighter, buoyed by the prospect of real progress. Moments after she hung up, her phone buzzed. It was Dr. Alicia Porter, the friend whose clinic Jada had been en route to the previous night. "Jada, I just saw the news," Alicia said breathlessly. "Are you okay?" A jolt of alarm gripped Jada. "What news? I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" Some local tabloid website is running a story about a high-profile citizen who was pulled over in a Rolls-Royce for alleged drug possession. It's laced with all kinds of insinuations. Jada's stomach twisted. "That's ridiculous. We were pulled over for a supposed lane change violation. There was no mention of drugs." "Well, they're making it sound like you were a suspect." They even have a quote from an anonymous officer in the Chicago Police Department claiming you exhibited suspicious behavior. Carmen, overhearing, walked over and put a hand on Jada's shoulder. Her eyes were wide with concern. Jada swallowed hard and took a deep breath. "Thanks for letting me know, Alicia. I'll look into this." After ending the call, Jada opened her laptop and quickly found the website Dr. Porter was referencing. Sure enough, there was a grainy photo of a Rolls-Royce at the side of the road. The article was filled with insinuations, painting a picture of a wealthy black woman being stopped for suspected drug possession. Though her name wasn't directly mentioned, the details were damningly close to her situation. Carmen muttered a curse. "This is insane. No one found anything. There's no reason for a story like this to exist unless someone wants to smear you." Jada stared at the screen, anger fueling her determination. "I'd bet my entire fortune that Officer Reynolds is behind this. He must have leaked a twisted version to the press." Carmen nodded. "What do we do? Call our PR team? Issue a statement?" "Yes, and I want the truth out there," Jada replied, her voice brimming with resolve. "We can't let some racist officer tarnish my reputation or the work we're trying to do." She immediately dialed her public relations manager, Lisa Bennett. Within minutes, Lisa had begun damage control, contacting major news outlets, clarifying the false allegations, and offering official statements. Yet Jada sensed it would be a long, exhausting process. It wasn't just her name on the line. The incubator's credibility could suffer if the public started believing these baseless rumors. As the day progressed, Jada received multiple calls from concerned colleagues, sponsors, and even a few high-profile donors who saw the sensational headlines. Some expressed unwavering support, while others took a cautious, wait-and-see approach. The entire situation triggered an echo of the same old prejudice Jada had fought her entire life. Even with her billions, her philanthropic track record and national recognition, she could become a scapegoat for a bigot with a badge and a malicious intent. "Let's go on the offensive," Carmen suggested. "We have verifiable proof that no drugs were found and that the search came up empty. We have the traffic cam footage and presumably body cam footage from the officers if it hasn't magically disappeared. Plus, any ticket for a lane change or tinted windows is easy to verify. We can show people this is all fabricated." Jada nodded, taking a steadying breath. "Yes, let's do that. But I also want accountability. I'm not letting this slide. I want to file a complaint with the Chicago Police Department. This officer shouldn't be allowed to harass people." Carmen offered a supportive smile. "I'm with you, 100%. Let's do it." They put the wheels in motion, contacting lawyers, drafting official complaints, and coordinating with Jada's security team. In the midst of the chaos, Jada's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a representative from a nationally syndicated news show wanting an on-air interview. The segment, they said, would address both the allegations and her philanthropic work. Taking a brief moment to reflect, Jada realized this was about more than clearing her name. It was a chance to shed light on the broader issue of racial profiling and corruption, a chance to stand up for every marginalized person who'd faced harassment. Her voice might be the catalyst that forced real change within the system. With renewed resolve, she picked up the phone and said, "Yes, I'd be happy to share my side of the story. Though she felt a spark of hope, a larger storm brewed on the horizon. Officer Reynolds wouldn't back down easily. His type rarely did. And as tensions continued to rise, it became increasingly clear this was just the beginning of the battle. Across town, Officer Christopher Reynolds paced in his modest kitchen. Piles of clutter surrounded him, unopened mail, a few half-empty beer cans, and discarded newspapers. His knuckles whitened around his phone as he read a text from the same tabloid journalist he'd spoken to the previous night. The headline was generating clicks, but it wasn't catching on with reputable outlets as he'd hoped. Reynolds took a swig of cheap beer, frustration etched into every line of his face. He felt cornered, disrespected, overshadowed, just like he always did. For the past 2 decades, he had served on the Chicago Police Department, bouncing from precinct to precinct. Promotions had eluded him, overshadowed by a track record of complaints. Allegations of racial bias, excessive force, and misconduct had dogged his record. Yet he'd managed to dodge serious consequences through a toxic mix of departmental silence, union protection, and a lack of definitive proof. It hadn't always been this way. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood on Chicago's West Side, Reynolds dreamed of joining the police force to become a hero, someone who would protect and serve. But somewhere along the line, bitterness took root. Maybe it was seeing childhood friends get rich or escape the neighborhood while he remained. Maybe it was realizing he wasn't the hero he'd envisioned. The uniform became his crutch, a way to exert power in a world where he felt powerless. Over time, resentment curdled into hostility, especially toward those he deemed unworthy of success. He saw Jada Sinclair's luxury car and her confident demeanor, and it had triggered something deep, a sense of injustice that she had more than he ever would, that she was respected, celebrated, and admired. And that she was black, something he couldn't consciously admit bothered him, but it did. Prejudice became a convenient outlet for all his insecurities. Tossing his phone aside, he paced in front of a threadbare couch. "Damn it," he muttered. "Why isn't this story blowing up like I planned?" He'd expected the sensational angle, billionaire woman suspected of running drugs, to spread like wildfire. He wanted public suspicion to swirl around her. Maybe then she'd learn not to mouth off to him or challenge his authority. He snatched the remote and flipped on the TV, hoping to see the story dominating the news cycle. Instead, a local station was featuring a segment on Jada's philanthropic work. There she was, her smile radiant as she toured an underprivileged school, discussing scholarship initiatives. Reynolds felt his anger spike. "Of course they're eating out of her hand," he spat at the screen. In truth, Reynolds was now in a risky position. His leaked story to that tabloid was all but a direct violation of department policy. If it was traced back to him, he could face suspension or worse. But he was counting on the blue wall of silence to hold. He believed he was untouchable. After all, he had gotten away with misconduct before. A shrill ring from his phone jolted him out of his thoughts. He grabbed it, expecting more updates from the journalist, but the caller ID showed Sergeant Foley. Heart pounding, Reynolds hesitated before answering. "Yes, Sergeant?" "Officer Reynolds." Foley's voice was clipped. "I've just received word that a complaint has been filed against you. Something to do with a traffic stop last night involving Ms. Jada Sinclair. Does that ring a bell?" Reynolds swallowed. "Yes, sir, I remember the stop. She was suspicious, so I followed protocol. This is just some billionaire trying to get her way, right?" A heavy sigh echoed through the line. "Look, Reynolds, you're going to have to come in for questioning. The department can't ignore a complaint like this, especially with the press sniffing around. Report to my office at 9 tomorrow morning. We'll figure this out." Before Reynolds could protest, the call ended. He stood there, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. A complaint from a high-profile figure like Jada Sinclair was a different beast. The chief and the mayor were likely involved. They'd want to handle this carefully. He half wondered if he should deny everything, but how? There was body cam footage, traffic cam footage, and the very real possibility that the truth would come out. Yet, even through the creeping dread, his pride refused to let him back down. "She's not gonna ruin me," he hissed, draining the last of his beer. "I'll make sure of that." The hours dragged on, and he found himself replaying the stop over and over in his head, searching for angles to discredit Jada, to paint himself as the diligent officer who'd simply been doing his job. But somewhere deep beneath the self-righteous indignation, a small, nagging voice told him this time might be different. This time, he might have met his match. The following morning, Jada sat in her office, tension building as she waited for her legal team to finalize the official complaint. She had done everything by the book, documented the traffic stop, gathered witness statements from Carmen and Leonard, and collected any digital evidence her security team could recover. The process was draining, but she refused to shy away. This fight wasn't just about her name, it was about standing against the injustice that so many others faced without the resources she had. Her phone chimed with a message from Lisa Bennett, her PR manager. "Turn on Channel 7. Now." Jada quickly grabbed the remote and flipped the TV to Channel 7's midday news broadcast. A reporter stood outside the Chicago Police Department's headquarters, microphone in hand, describing a sudden leak of body cam footage from the night of Jada's stop. Sources say the footage shows questionable behavior by the officer in question, including remarks that suggest potential racial bias. The CPD is launching an internal investigation. A rush of relief surged through Jada, followed by a wave of apprehension. At least the narrative was no longer one-sided. She waited as the station cut to a short snippet of the footage. There on screen was a portion of Officer Reynolds's body cam video. While the sound was muffled, certain phrases stood out. "I don't care who she thinks she is. These people don't get to slip by." It wasn't outright slurs, but the insinuations dripped with prejudice. Carmen, who was taking notes nearby, exclaimed softly, "They caught him red-handed. That's enough to prove malicious intent, right?" Jada nodded, her eyes never leaving the screen. "It's definitely evidence that he wasn't treating us fairly or professionally. I'm sure the department will have to address this." The segment ended with the reporter stating the CPD had placed Officer Reynolds on administrative leave pending investigation. A swirl of relief and vindication coursed through Jada's veins. Finally, a glimmer of accountability. Yet she also knew how complicated these departmental investigations could become. She'd seen it too many times. Cops protected by the system, the blame shifted, the truth buried. Was it too optimistic to believe this would be different? Her phone buzzed again, another text, but this time from an unknown number. "Check your email. You'll want to see this." Jada frowned, sharing a curious glance with Carmen. She opened her laptop and found a message in her inbox from a cryptic email address. It contained no greeting, only a link. A part of her hesitated. It could be a phishing scam or malicious link. But the subject line read, "Regarding Reynolds, more evidence." She forwarded it to her tech team to safely open in a sandbox environment. Within minutes, she received a secure message back from the head of IT, confirming the link was a private video file. "It appears to be legitimate and safe to view," the note read. Feeling a knot tighten in her gut, Jada clicked on the link. A shaky cell phone video began to play. It looked like someone filming a group of officers in a locker room. She recognized Officer Reynolds immediately. He was laughing, leaning against a row of lockers, speaking to another officer whose face wasn't fully visible. His words, however, were crystal clear. "I don't care if she's Oprah Winfrey. If I see someone like that in a car that expensive, I'm pulling them over. They think they can buy their way out of anything. But not on my watch. People like her need a good scare now and then. Keep 'em in line. You know what I mean?" Jada's breath caught in her throat. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Carmen's hand flew to her mouth. This was no ambiguous statement. This was blatant racism and abuse of power, captured on video. Reynolds's face was smirking as he spewed hateful rhetoric, referencing someone like that. There was no mistaking his intentions. The clip ended abruptly. Shock reverberated through Jada. This is "This is unbelievable," she managed, feeling her heart pound against her ribs. She'd known Reynolds targeted her, but hearing him so explicitly brag about it was still a punch to the gut. Carmen steadied herself. "This changes everything. We have him on record admitting racial profiling. He's basically confessing to using his authority to scare black drivers in expensive cars." Jada nodded, eyes locked on the now blank video screen. "We have to turn this over to my lawyers immediately, and to the department. This is enough to ensure he can't dodge the consequences." But as quickly as her sense of relief emerged, so did anger. Anger at a system that allowed someone like Reynolds to flourish for years. Anger at the smug entitlement in his voice, and anger at the knowledge that for many people without her resources, justice would never be served. She forwarded the clip to her legal team and scheduled an urgent meeting with them. Her phone rang again. This time it was the reporter from Channel 7 who had covered her philanthropic work. "Miss Sinclair," he said, "we've just received an anonymous tip that there's a more damning video of Officer Reynolds. Could you comment?" Jada took a steadying breath. News spread fast. "I can't comment specifically yet, but I can confirm that new evidence has been brought to my attention. All I'll say is, I want the truth out in the open." Before ending the call, the reporter asked, "Do you think this will finally bring about changes in the CPD's approach to racial profiling?" Jada paused. "I can only hope. This is bigger than me. It always has been." Hanging up, she glanced at Carmen, who offered a supportive nod. The revelation was both horrifying and empowering. For the first time since the humiliating traffic stop, Jada felt the tide might be turning in her favor. But she also knew Reynolds wasn't the only one in a flawed system. This might just be the tip of the iceberg, a single thread that, once pulled, could unravel deeper issues that had plagued Chicago for decades. "This is bigger than a single officer," Jada whispered. "I'm going to see this through." Her resolve solidified. The next steps wouldn't be easy. Interviews, depositions, public scrutiny. But Jada Sinclair was no stranger to daunting challenges. And this time she carried not just the weight of her own reputation, but the hopes of an entire community who deserved justice at last. By midday, the leaked locker room video had gone viral. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook and Instagram lit up with outraged posts, retweets and hashtags. "Did you justice for Jada?" and "You Reynolds exposed" trended almost immediately in Chicago and soon spread nationally. Civil rights activists, celebrities and community leaders weighed in, expressing support for Jada and condemning Reynolds' actions. Even politicians scrambled to release statements denouncing racially motivated policing. From her office windows, Jada could see the city unfolding in chaos and solidarity. Protesters began gathering outside police headquarters, their signs condemning systemic racism and demanding reform. Others congregated around City Hall, calling for a full investigation of the Chicago Police Department's handling of such officers. The air crackled with the electricity of collective anger and hope. Inside Jada's workspace, phones rang non-stop. Carmen coordinated with staff to handle the deluge of media requests. Sponsors and donors reached out to reassure Jada of their continued support, while a few expressed fears about the negative press overshadowing her philanthropic work. Despite the dizzying pace, Jada stayed focused, determined to drive meaningful change from this moment. Her laptop screen buzzed with notifications. Emails poured in, from well-wishers, former colleagues, fellow philanthropists, and strangers whose stories of racial profiling mirrored her own. As she read through them, her eyes misted over with empathy and resolve. One message stood out from a mother who shared how her teenage son was repeatedly stopped by the same precinct Reynolds belonged to, each time feeling more terrified than the last. It was a stark reminder that this issue transcended her personal experience. She was fighting for them too. Meanwhile, across social media platforms, a counter-narrative began to appear. A vocal minority of accounts hurled insults, accused her of playing the race card, and insisted Officer Reynolds was just doing his job. Some posts questioned the authenticity of the video, labeling it a deep fake. Others spewed vitriol at Jada for trying to ruin a white man's career. Carmen flagged these hateful comments and blocked the worst offenders, but the digital harassment stung nonetheless. "Don't let it get to you," Carmen advised, looking up from her phone. "We expected some backlash. The truth is on your side." Jada sighed. "I know. This is just... It's tough to see how many people are so quick to dismiss blatant racism." Before she could dwell further, her desk phone rang. She recognized the number. It was from the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. A sense of anticipation mingled with dread. "Hello?" she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. A firm, measured voice introduced herself as Lieutenant Naomi Gardner from Internal Affairs. "Mrs. Sinclair, we'd like to formally invite you in for an interview regarding Officer Reynolds's conduct and any other information you may have. Our investigation is ongoing, but your testimony is crucial." Jada's stomach knotted. "Of course, I'll cooperate in any way I can." She set the phone down and looked at Carmen, who mouthed, "Internal Affairs?" Jada nodded, anxiety swirling in her chest. The stakes were mounting. This was no longer a matter of filing a simple complaint. A full-fledged investigation could lead to broader scrutiny of the department. Jada's words could be the catalyst that either toppled long-standing corruption or, if mishandled, shut down any real chance of reform. A sudden ping on Jada's computer announced an incoming video call from one of the biggest national morning shows. The producer's message read, "We'd love to have you on to talk about your experience, the leaked video, and your philanthropic work. Our segment can reach millions of viewers." Jada hesitated for a moment. Going national meant increased visibility and influence, but also more scrutiny and harassment. Yet, she'd vowed to use her platform. This was exactly the moment that could sway public opinion and build pressure for institutional change. She clicked "Accept" on the call. The producer's face appeared, all business and bright expressions. "Ms. Sinclair, thank you so much for taking the time. We plan to run the segment tomorrow morning. Are you available to join us live, either in our studio or via remote feed?" "I'll do it," Jada replied, her voice unwavering. "We need to talk about these issues in front of as many people as possible." "Fantastic. Our team will coordinate the technical details with you. We're looking forward to hearing your story." For nearly 2 hours, Jada recounted the events of that night. How Reynolds had stopped her, the invasive search, the condescension, and eventually the smear campaign he initiated through a tabloid. Marcus supplemented her testimony with records indicating Reynolds's prior complaints and questionable history. Carmen chimed in occasionally, verifying timelines and filling in details. Throughout, Lieutenant Gardner listened intently, occasionally scribbling notes. Her expression remained neutral, but Jada sensed the weight of the words sinking in. When Jada finished, Gardner exhaled, pressing her lips together in a tight line. "Thank you, Ms. Sinclair. Your testimony is invaluable. We've received multiple other complaints, but none had the kind of evidence you've provided. This might be the push that's needed for real disciplinary action, or more." Marcus leaned forward. "Officer Reynolds's conduct is a symptom of a larger issue. How deep does this investigation go? Will you be looking into other officers or systemic problems?" Gardner's eyes flicked momentarily to the other investigators. Then she nodded. "That's the plan. The department has been under scrutiny for years. The mayor's office wants a thorough house cleaning if it comes to that. We've also got the Civilian Office of Police Accountability involved." A flicker of relief crossed Jada's face. Maybe, just maybe, something constructive would come of all this. As the meeting wound down, the investigators thanked Jada again for her courage in coming forward. She and her team made their way to the lobby, where the buzz of ringing phones and hushed conversations filled the air. They'd done their part, at least for now. Outside, a handful of reporters awaited, eager for statements. Cameras flashed as Jada stepped out into the late afternoon sun. Microphones were thrust forward. "Ms. Sinclair, how did the meeting go? Any comment on Reynolds' current status? Is the CPD taking this seriously?" Jada offered a composed response. I believe the CPD's Internal Affairs Division is doing their job. I've provided my testimony and evidence. All I want is accountability and change, not just for me, but for everyone who's been unfairly targeted. Thank you." She maintained her poise, even as the reporters clamored for more sound bites. Then, with Marcus and Carmen flanking her, she slipped into a waiting car and headed back to her office. The afternoon faded into evening by the time she returned. Her staff had been fielding calls all day, city leaders, activists, journalists. Sitting down at her desk, she finally allowed herself a moment to exhale. The emotional toll of retelling the story, reliving the humiliating stop, felt heavy. Yet she refused to let fatigue dampen her determination. Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did well today. We have a strong case. Let's see if the department does the right thing." Jada nodded, exhaustion creasing the corners of her eyes. "They have to. The evidence is too damning to ignore." But as she glanced out her window at the city lights, she knew the fight was far from over. Officer Reynolds might try to strike back. People like him rarely went quietly, and there was no telling how many others shared his mentality within the system. The words of her father came to her then. "Justice isn't a single event, Jada. It's a constant daily fight." She inhaled that truth. Tomorrow she had a nationally televised interview where she planned to speak frankly about the situation. The world was watching. She only hoped her truth would spark a shift in a system that had failed so many for so long. For now, she took solace in each small victory: a leaked video, an internal affairs interview, a wave of public support. Step by step, the shield of impunity was cracking, and she would keep pushing until it shattered entirely. A few weeks later, the investigation rapidly escalated to a formal hearing before the Chicago Police Board, with the potential for criminal charges against Officer Reynolds. The swirl of media coverage was almost overwhelming. Jada sat in a quiet corridor outside the hearing room, the hum of overhead fluorescent lights and the echo of hushed voices setting the stage for what felt like a pivotal moment in Chicago's history. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that exuded confidence and professionalism. Marcus was beside her, reviewing his notes one last time. Carmen hovered close, offering a reassuring hand squeeze. Across the hall, a few uniformed officers walked by, eyeing Jada with a mixture of curiosity and tension. Some nodded politely, others quickly looked away. When the time came, Jada and her team entered the hearing room. A row of police board members sat behind a long table, their expressions solemn. To one side sat Officer Reynolds and his attorney, a stern-looking man with close-set eyes. Reynolds avoided eye contact with Jada as she took her seat at the witness table. The proceeding began with formalities, introductions, statements of purpose. Then came the testimonies. The prosecuting counsel from the city methodically laid out Officer Reynolds's pattern of misconduct, citing internal complaints, witness testimonies, and the damning locker room video. Jada found her heart racing when the video played on a large screen for the board. Reynolds stared at the floor, jaw tight. His attorney scribbled notes but said nothing. After the prosecution presented its case, it was time for Jada to speak. She rose, swore the oath, and took the stand. She described the traffic stop in clear, measured tones, resisting the urge to let her emotions overwhelm her. She recounted Reynolds' hostility, the intrusive search, and the subsequent smear campaign. Each time the prosecuting attorney asked for clarity, Jada answered with unwavering composure. By the day's end, both sides presented their closing statements. The board was expected to deliberate for a few days before issuing a recommendation. Reynolds could face termination, loss of pension, or potentially criminal charges if the state's attorney decided to prosecute. The entire city watched and waited. Exiting the courtroom, Jada faced a barrage of reporters. She maintained her composure, giving a brief statement. "Today was about truth and accountability. I trust the board to make the right decision based on the overwhelming evidence." She purposely avoided inflammatory language, wanting to project calm confidence. As she slid into the back seat of a car waiting outside, exhaustion crashed over her. She sank against the seat, the adrenaline high waning. "I feel like I've been carrying boulders on my shoulders all day," she admitted. Carmen offered a gentle smile. "You were amazing. We all saw it." Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. "Trust me, Jada. We've made a strong case. It's almost impossible for him to walk away unscathed." The car pulled away from the courthouse, weaving into Chicago's bustling streets. Despite her fatigue, Jada felt a stirring of hope. Perhaps the city was witnessing a turning point, a chance to demand integrity within law enforcement, to hold power to account. But the final verdict was still to come, and with it, the promise or disappointment of long overdue justice. The city buzzed with anticipation as the police board deliberated for 2 tense days. Protests outside police headquarters swelled in number, with community organizations and civil rights groups gathering daily to demand justice. Social media became a battleground of opinions, updates, and debates. Would the board fire Reynolds? Would criminal charges follow? Chicago seemed split between those demanding accountability and those clinging to the few bad apples narrative. Jada tried to keep her mind occupied with her philanthropic work. She visited a local community center where she funded after-school programs. She met with architecture firms for the Bronzeville incubator, finalizing construction plans. Yet, even in those spaces, questions about the court hearing trailed her. Everyone wanted to know if this could mark a new era for policing in the city. Finally, the police board announced a public meeting to reveal their decision. Jada, Carmen, and Marcus arrived early, finding the hearing room packed with reporters, activists, and onlookers. Cameras flashed as they took their seats. Standing at the front, the board's chairperson cleared her throat, silence enveloping the room. "After reviewing all evidence and testimonies," she began, "the board unanimously concludes that Officer Christopher Reynolds violated departmental policies, engaged in racial profiling, and abused his authority. We recommend immediate termination from the Chicago Police Department." The room erupted in chatter and shouts, a cacophony of relief and anger, depending on which side one stood. Jada closed her eyes, exhaling a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Carmen squeezed her hand. Finally, a step toward justice. Marcus leaned in to whisper, "The state's attorney could still pursue charges. This is just the beginning, but it's a big win." At the front of the room, Reynolds stood with clenched fists, his face pale. He turned to his lawyer, who wore an expression that signaled defeat. The hush that fell over them was deafening. In that moment, Reynolds's aura of arrogance crumbled, replaced by fury and panic. The consequences of his actions had caught up with him. After the board's pronouncement, multiple city officials stepped forward, applauding the decision. Yet some high-ranking officers wore tight-lipped expressions, signaling the department's internal tensions. Outside, a crowd of supporters cheered when Jada emerged, chanting her name and hoisting signs that read, "Justice at last, and no more silent cops." The atmosphere was electric, brimming with a sense of shared victory. That night, Jada found herself at a podium in a small press conference organized by her foundation, addressing the public for the first time after the ruling. Cameras streamed live footage across local and national networks. Her voice wavered slightly, a mix of relief and responsibility. "This is a win for everyone who's ever felt powerless," she began. "But let's not celebrate too soon. One officer losing his badge is not the end. We need comprehensive reform, better training, and a culture shift in policing. We must stand for a future where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of race or status." She paused, letting her words resonate. "I intend to continue working with community leaders, the mayor's office, and the police department to ensure this momentum isn't lost. This is our city, and we all have a role in making it just." A thunderous applause followed. Some people in the audience dabbed tears from their eyes, while others raised fists in solidarity. As she stepped down, Carmen offered a proud smile, and Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. The days that followed saw an outpouring of support for Jada and her cause. Donations to her foundation skyrocketed as people rallied behind her message. Even more encouraging were the calls from other officers, thanking Jada for exposing a toxic presence in their ranks. One anonymous letter read, "He was a disgrace to the badge. We want real change too." But it wasn't all positive. A fraction of the police union leadership bristled, accusing the city of scapegoating Reynolds to appease public outrage. Conservative commentators questioned whether the evidence had been overblown. Death threats appeared in Jada's email inbox, forcing her security team to tighten protocols. Still, none of this deterred her. She visited Bronzeville to check on the incubator's progress. Construction workers recognized her, clapping when she walked by. One young woman approached, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for fighting," she whispered, hugging Jada. "You're giving us hope." That single embrace reminded Jada of the weight her actions carried. With Reynolds effectively removed from the force and facing potential criminal charges, a message had been sent. Power without accountability was no longer guaranteed. While far from perfect, it was a start. Late that evening, when the city's skyline shimmered in the distance, Jada stood on her balcony reflecting on the whirlwind events. She knew the journey ahead would be long. Systemic problems weren't solved in a day or with one termination. But this was a crack in the dam, and the water of change had finally begun to rush through. "Dad was right," she murmured, looking up at the night sky. "Justice is a daily fight." And tomorrow, she'd wake up ready to keep fighting, knowing that this time she wasn't alone. In the weeks that followed, the reverberations of Officer Reynolds's firing spread through the city. Internal investigations uncovered more troubling cases tied to him, a handful of falsified traffic stop reports and suspicious inconsistencies in arrest records. The state's attorney's office decided to file criminal charges for misconduct and civil rights violations. Reynolds now faced the real possibility of prison time. Meanwhile, Jada's philanthropic efforts soared to new heights. The Bronzeville incubator broke ground with a celebratory ceremony, drawing key figures from business and politics, including Mayor Brandon Johnson. On a warm afternoon, Jada stood on a temporary stage, shovel in hand, beaming at the crowd. This wasn't just the start of a building, it was the start of opportunities for hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs who might otherwise be overlooked. As for Reynolds, his life unraveled quickly. Legal fees mounted, his marriage crumbled, and his friendships within the force withered. Officers who once turned a blind eye to his antics now distanced themselves. The few who supported him were overshadowed by the avalanche of public condemnation. The local press, sensing a salacious story, documented his downfall in lurid detail. No doubt a bitter irony, given his initial use of the media to smear Jada. A final stroke of karmic justice arrived when Reynolds' trial date was set. He'd hired a high-profile defense attorney, claiming he was a victim of political correctness run amok. However, the evidence stacked against him was too overwhelming. The locker room video, the body cam footage, the testimonies of Jada, Carmen, Leonard, Officer Martinez, and countless others formed a fortress of truth. Reynolds's stammering defenses didn't hold up under cross-examination. On the day of sentencing, Jada chose not to attend the courtroom. She had made her statement. The city, the judge, and most importantly, the public already knew the truth. Instead, she spent the morning reviewing job applications for the new incubator program. Word had spread, and hundreds of talented individuals, especially women of color, had applied. Reading their ambitions and dreams filled her with hope and purpose. Later that evening, Marcus called with the verdict. Reynolds was found guilty on multiple counts of misconduct and was sentenced to time behind bars, along with court-mandated community service upon release. Jada felt relief wash over her. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about ensuring that someone who weaponized his badge could no longer harm others. She quietly thanked Marcus, hung up, and turned her attention to future plans. A week passed, and Jada stood at a charity benefit, scanning a sea of influential faces. She was no longer just a billionaire philanthropist. She was a symbol of resilience and the fight against injustice. People approached her, praising her courage. Others offered donations to expand her scholarship programs. Amid the glitz of the gala, Jada noticed a group of young women watching her from afar, awe lighting up their eyes. She remembered being that girl once, full of ambition, but uncertain if the world would allow her to flourish. Carmen sidled up, handing Jada a glass of sparkling water. "You've become a legend in your own right, you know," she teased, bringing down a crooked cop, championing systemic reform. "What's next on your bucket list?" Jada laughed softly, a graceful sound that carried across the elegantly lit ballroom. "Oh, I'm not done," she replied. "We have to ensure real oversight in the police department. We need educational grants for formerly incarcerated youths, and I want to build more safe housing options in underprivileged neighborhoods." The list goes on. Carmen nodded. "Count me in, boss." Just then, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, mustered the courage to approach. "Ms. Sinclair, I just wanted to say, your story changed my life. I realized I can stand up for myself too. Thank you." Jada's heart swelled. "Thank you," she replied warmly. "That means everything to me." In that moment, she understood that while defeating Officer Reynolds was pivotal, it was merely a single chapter in a broader narrative of empowerment and equality. Her real legacy would be built through the lives she touched and the doors she opened for others. Outside, the wind swept through Chicago's streets, carrying the echoes of protests and celebrations alike. The city still had scars, still struggled with institutional challenges, but there was a fresh undercurrent of promise, hope that with enough voices rising, change could take root. Jada Sinclair stood at the epicenter, a living testament to resilience. One racist cop had tried to bring her down, only to inadvertently amplify her platform. Now, the entire city, and perhaps the nation, had witnessed what happened when power was misused and the right person dared to resist. The next day, she'd be back in her office, forging ahead with new initiatives. Because justice wasn't a one-time victory, it was a lifelong journey, and Jada was more than ready to continue leading the way. From a late-night traffic stop fueled by prejudice to a triumphant courtroom resolution, Jada Sinclair's story proves that even in the face of oppressive power, justice can and must prevail. Her bravery not only toppled one corrupt officer, but also ignited a citywide call for police reform and inspired countless people to stand up for their rights. While systemic issues remain, Jada's victory stands as a beacon of hope, showing that change often begins with a single voice, refusing to be silenced. Thank you for watching this dramatic tale of courage, redemption, and hard-earned karma. If you found meaning in Jada's story, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you'll help spread the message that no amount of hate can withstand truth and resilience. Together, we can continue fostering important conversations and paving the way for a more just world.